Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we are immersing ourselves in the world of an artist whose name is synonymous with sun-drenched picnics, vibrant dance halls, and, well, the abundant joy of the female form, Pierre-Auguste Renoir.
He really is. When we talk about Impressionism, we often focus on the radical technical stuff, the broken brushstrokes, the sort of scientific look at light.
Right.
But Renoir is unique in that he channeled those revolutionary tools towards something profoundly traditional, almost primal. He was, above all, the ultimate celebrator of life's visible pleasures, and especially, I'd say, feminine sensuality.
That really sets him apart, doesn't it? Our sources make this just astonishing, kind of sweeping claim about his position in art history. They say he is the final representative of a tradition which runs directly from Rubens to Watteau.
Wow.
That places him at the very end of this long, celebrated European lineage. Heavy stuff.
It's a remarkable claim, yeah, but when you really look at his body of work, you can see why they'd say that. It holds up. What does that lineage mean, though?
Good question.
It means, I think, a rejection of that severe, maybe intellectual classicism that dominated so much of European art. It means prioritizing the celebration of the flesh, the texture of skin, the warmth of the body, the sheer physical abundance of life.
Like Rubens.
Exactly. Rubens did it with these grand, mythic figures. Watteau brought it into those aristocratic gardens, fêtes galantes.
And Renoir.
Renoir brought it right into the middle-class Parisian dance halls, the cafes, and the intimacy of family life. He made it modern, accessible.
It really speaks volumes about his career's sheer breadth and duration, too.
Right.
Born in Limoges, 1841, died in 1919, he was right there, a central figure through the whole development of the Impressionist style.
Almost 7 decades of continuous creativity. It's pretty staggering.
And just as important as the canvases he left behind is, the cultural dynasty he started. Before we even get into the paint and the palette knives, we really have to highlight his family legacy. It's incredible.
Oh, absolutely. Renoir wasn't just a painter. He was, in a way, the patriarch of this whole line of modern arts figures.
Think about this. He was the father of Pierre Renoir, the stage and film actor. He was the father of the legendary filmmaker Jean Renoir, who gave us classics like Grand Illusion and The Rules of the Game.
And who wrote that incredibly moving memoir about him, Renoir, My Father. Essential reading if you're interested in Renoir the man.
Definitely. And then there was Claude Renoir, the ceramic artist, his third son. But the talent didn't even stop there.
No, he was also the grandfather of another filmmaker, Claude Renoir, Pierre's son, who was a noted cinematographer.
It's just an incredible line of cultural achievement, all flowing directly from this one Impressionist painter. Really gives you a sense of the dynamic, artistic environment he must have fostered at home.
It really does.
So our mission today is to trace this extraordinary journey for you. We're going to unpack the sources, look at everything from his beginnings as a tailor's son who, sometimes couldn't even afford paint, through his pivotal, quite radical role in Impressionism, then those dramatic, self-imposed style changes he made in mid-career.
The Angres period.
Exactly. And finally, that incredible story of his persistence, how he kept creating these masterpieces despite decades of severe, crippling physical disability. We want to give you the full picture.
Okay, let's start right at the beginning. Limoges, 1841. Renoir's origins were definitively humble. His father, Léonard Renoir, was a tailor. The family lived a very modest life.
Yeah, their economic situation really dictated things. By 1844, they moved to central Paris, settled on the Rue d'Argenteau. Now, this move was crucial for a couple of reasons.
Okay.
Well, one, they hoped for better tailoring prospects in the capital, obviously. But two, it situated the young Renoir remarkably close to the Louvre Museum. So that visual education started early, even if it was, maybe unconscious at first.
It's funny, we often look back and sort of impose destiny onto artists, don't we? Assume they were always meant to paint. But the sources give us this really surprising, almost alternate reality path that Renoir nearly took.
They absolutely do. While he apparently showed a natural knack for drawing, his earliest, most recognized talent was actually for singing.
Singing, yeah. He was encouraged by Charles Gounod. Yes, that Gounod who was the choir master at the Church of St. Roch at the time. Had finances been different, Renoir might have ended up known today as like a composer or maybe a celebrated opera singer. Who knows?
That's wild. But financial constraints defined his early life, as you said, so that promising musical path got cut short pretty abruptly.
It did. He had to stop the lessons and, at just 13, leave school entirely. He was sent off to become an apprentice at a porcelain factory.
A porcelain factory. That sounds specific.
It was the reality for a working-class family then. He was put to work decorating plates, cups, that sort of thing, basically applying pre-designed patterns onto commercial ceramics. It was probably pretty monotonous, an early grind.
But maybe useful skills.
Oh, definitely. It was also a vital training ground in its own way. It taught him precision, speed, and a real mastery over small, delicate brushwork, skills that would actually serve him later.
Still, he found the subject matter pretty tiresome, stuck in commercial work. We know his refuge became the Louvre, just nearby. Was this just a kid escaping boredom, or was he actually studying?
Seems like active study. He was soaking up the old masters, the ones who had perfected the art of the human figure long before the Impressionists came along. And crucially, the owner of the porcelain factory apparently recognized that Renoir's talent went way beyond just commercial decorating.
Ah, so someone noticed.
Yes, and he communicated this to the family. This was the push they needed, and it led Renoir to start taking drawing lessons, specifically to prepare for the École des Beaux-Arts, the main art school.
But even this artistic path wasn't straightforward, was it? The Industrial Revolution kind of literally caught up with him.
It really did. In 1858, the porcelain factory switched over to mechanical reproduction methods for the decorative work. Suddenly, Renoir's hand skills were obsolete overnight.
Wow, so back to square one.
Pretty much. He was forced to find other ways to make a living for about 4 years before he could finally enroll in art school in 1862. He was truly hustling, painting decorative hangings for overseas missionaries, apparently.
Seriously? Missionaries?
Yeah, and maybe a bit more artistically relevant decorating fans. He was basically a freelance commercial artist, just trying to stay afloat long enough to get into proper training.
You have to admire the persistence.
Yeah.
Finally, 1862, he enrolls, studies under Charles Gleyre in Paris, and this is where he meets that foundational group, the guys who would become the Impressionists.
Yes, this is the key moment. He meets Alfred Sisley, Frederic Bazille, and the man who would probably most radically alter Renoir's direction, Claude Monet.
The dream team.
This quartet started questioning the academic orthodoxy together. They began developing this shared vision that would, pretty soon break all the rules of French painting.
But even hanging out with this revolutionary group, the financial struggle was absolutely constant. The sources really stressed that throughout the 1860s, Renoir often literally didn't have the money to buy basic supplies, paint, canvas.
It just underscores the sheer dedication of that early generation, doesn't it? They believed so strongly in this new way of seeing light and color that they just kept working, even when they were basically destitute.
Incredible.
But despite the strain, he did have a major, if maybe temporary, breakthrough. His first real success at the official salon in 1868 with Lise with a parasol. It's a lovely portrait of his lover at the time, Lise Trejo.
But wider recognition was slow coming, partly because of the turbulent political climate you mentioned. The Franco-Prussian War, the Paris Commune in 1871.
Exactly. And that historical context brings us to this remarkable, almost unbelievable anecdote, the Seine incident.
Ah, yes. Tell us about that. It sounds dramatic.
It perfectly captures the danger and chaos of that year, 1871, during the Commune. Renoir was out painting, doing a landscape on the banks of the Seine River. During the Commune, paranoia was absolutely rampant. Anyone sketching could be suspected of mapping positions, spying for the government side against the communards.
Oh, I see where this is going.
Yeah. He was surrounded by a group of communards who decided he was a spy, and they were literally preparing to throw him into the river.
Good grief. That's not just a threat, that's immediate execution. How did he get out of that?
Pure dumb luck and personal history. He was saved when one of the commune leaders, a man named Raoul Rigaud, happened to recognize Renoir.
Recognized him how?
Apparently, Rigaud was someone Renoir had helped or protected in some capacity in the past. A prior connection. A forgotten favor. Rigaud intervened and spared his life.
Wow. It's terrifying to think how close Impressionism came to losing one of its core founders right there in a moment of civil unrest.
Gives you chills, doesn't it?
It really does. Now, moving past that turmoil, in 1874, there was another loss. Less life-threatening, certainly, but still significant for his art. The end of his 10-year friendship with Jules Lecoeur.
Right, and this loss had a really direct impact on his subject matter. Lecoeur owned property near the forest of Fontainebleau, a really scenic area.
Where he'd painted before.
Exactly. Lecoeur had given Renoir access, and Renoir had spent years painting these beautiful, lush green landscapes there. Losing that access, that location, basically forced him to shift his focus. He turned much more towards painting modern, urban life, figures, portraits, which in turn propelled him straight into the heart of core Impressionist themes. So, having been repeatedly snubbed by the conservative salon, Renoir was really ready to commit fully to the revolution, artistically speaking. By this time, he was heavily inspired by the stylistic innovations of Camille Pissarro, and also the sharp social observations in the work of Edouard Manet.
And so the revolution finally took physical form in April 1874. After all those rejections from the establishment, he joined Monet, Sisley, Pissarro, Degas, Berthe Morisot, and others, and they mounted their own show, the first Impressionist exhibition. He put in 6 paintings.
And while the critics were famously savage towards the exhibition as a whole, that's where the term Impressionist was first used, dismissively, like their paintings were just mere impressions.
Right, unfinished sketches.
Exactly. But Renoir's work actually stood out. It was noted for its charm, its skill. He received comparatively well-received criticism, even amidst the general outcry. He was now officially, publicly, part of this movement challenging centuries of academic tradition.
And the core of that challenge, as we touched on, came from their technical innovation, especially that discovery they made painting en plein air outdoors with Monet in the late 1860s. It fundamentally changed how they treated color, didn't it?
Oh, completely. It was a visual, almost scientific breakthrough about light, specifically something called diffuse reflection. Traditional painting basically assumed shadows were just gray or black or brown pigment, lifeless.
Okay.
But the Impressionists, painting outside, really looked. And they realized that light, when it scatters, actually carries the color of the surfaces it bounces off.
Right. Can you walk us through that again, like in painting terms?
Sure. Think about, say, a figure in a white dress standing on a bright green lawn under a blue sky. The shadow cast by that figure isn't just a dark gray shape. It's actually filled with the reflected green light bouncing up from the grass and the cool, diffused blue light coming down from the sky.
Ah, so the shadow itself has color.
Precisely. A shadow on that white dress might actually contain subtle violets, blues, maybe even hints of green. The shadow lives. This single observation immediately made their canvases vibrate with light and color in a way that academic painting just couldn't replicate.
And we see this perfected in works like La Grenouillère from 1869, which he actually painted side by side with Monet, both of them exploring this new phenomenon.
Exactly. And this discovery leads directly to the style we instantly recognize as Impressionism, those quick, freely brushed touches of color that suggest details rather than outlining them rigidly. The figures and the atmosphere kind of subtly fuse together, capturing a momentary, vibrant reality. It's all about the fleeting moment.
And this revolutionary style produced his great early masterpieces. We absolutely have to talk about dance at Le Moulin de la Galette from 1876.
Oh, Moulin de la Galette, yeah. That's arguably the definitive statement of Renoir's early Impressionism. It's a huge canvas, absolutely massive, yet it feels completely spontaneous, like an instantaneous snapshot.
What's it depicting?
It captures real life at this popular outdoor dance garden up in Montmartre. It's just full of bustling crowds, sparkling color, dappled sunlight filtering down through the acacia trees. It has incredible energy, social observation, pure joy. He also did the swing around the same time, another classic of that period.
But despite this artistic high point, Renoir never lost sight of the practical need for financial stability. That kind of sets him apart from some of his more bohemian peers, maybe.
I think so. He knew critical acclaim was great, but it didn't pay the rent or buy the paint. This led to a very calculated, quite strategic shift in focus. When the second Impressionist exhibition opened in 1876, Renoir deliberately chose to display mostly portraits. This wasn't just artistic preference. It was an explicit, almost business-minded move. Portraiture was the traditional way artists attracted commissions and secured a reliable livelihood.
Smart. And did it work?
Brilliantly. By the late 1870s, he successfully transitioned from being seen as a struggling radical to becoming a genuinely fashionable painter. The moment that really cemented this status was the triumph of his large portrait, Madame Charpentier and her children, at the official Salon of 1879.
Getting into the Salon after being part of the Impressionist exhibitions, that's interesting.
It was huge. It signaled that his skill, his charm, his way with paint was simply undeniable, even to the establishment figures he'd previously rejected or been rejected by. The painting was adored. It was intimate, charming, beautifully painted, and it depicted a prominent, cultured family of the time Georges Charpentier was a major publisher.
So that gave him social currency.
Instant social currency. It attracted a wealthy clientele who now wanted their families, their lives, captured with that same luminosity and warmth that Renoir offered.
And that success then led directly to securing the patron who would become absolutely central to his life for years, Paul Bérard.
Indeed. In 1879, he met Bérard, who was a wealthy diplomat and an avid collector. Berard became his main patron, offering him not just steady commissions, but also regular invitations to stay and paint at his country estate in Normandy by the seaside.
So the days of struggling to afford paint were finally over.
Definitely over. And this newfound financial freedom, this security, is what directly enabled the next pivotal shift in his career, a real period of questioning and change, the Grand Tour. Right, so with financial freedom finally achieved, Renoir enters this period of pretty profound artistic questioning. The year 1881 becomes a major turning point, and it's defined by extensive, self-funded travel, his own version of the traditional Grand Tour.
He wasn't just taking a vacation, though. This was a deliberate quest for knowledge, wasn't it? He started in Algeria. Why Algeria?
He associated Algeria with the Romantic master Eugène Delacroix, whose use of color and light he deeply admired. He was seeking maybe a different kind of light, a different understanding of color, away from the Parisian grayness. Then he went on to Spain, specifically to Madrid, to study the work of the Spanish master Diego Velázquez.
Okay, so Delacroix, Velázquez, but the really transformative destinations were in Italy, right?
Absolutely. Italy was the game changer. He traveled to Florence to study the Venetian masters like Titian, soaking up their rich color and handling of flesh. And then he went to Rome to study the ultimate classicist, Raphael.
Raphael, that seems like a different direction entirely.
It was, and seeing the monumental forms, the structural integrity, the sheer permanence of the Renaissance masters, it planted this deep seed of doubt in his mind about his entire Impressionist project.
Really? A crisis of confidence, even after all that recent success with portraits and patrons.
Absolutely. The rigor, the drawing, the sheer longevity of that classical tradition felt staggering compared to what he perhaps saw as the fleeting, instantaneous nature of Impressionism. He started to feel that in chasing momentary light effects, he had sacrificed fundamental skills. He actually became convinced that Impressionism was, in his words, the wrong path.
Wow. That's a strong statement from a leading Impressionist. This emotional turmoil is captured in that extremely candid quote we have from him about the movement.
Yeah, he stated it very plainly. I had gone as far as I could with Impressionism, and I realized I could neither paint nor draw.
Ouch.
For a leading figure of the movement to confess such a profound sense of inadequacy after more than a decade of groundbreaking work and growing success, that's a proper existential crisis for an artist. He felt he needed to relearn to master the human form and outline all over again.
Before that crisis fully hit the canvas, though, there was this remarkable, almost absurdly brief, historical meeting he had while he was in Italy in January 1882.
Oh, right. The meeting with the legendary composer Richard Wagner. Yes. At Wagner's home in Palermo, Sicily. Renoir somehow managed to paint Wagner's portrait in just 35 minutes.
35 minutes, that's it.
That's the story. It's a stunning example of his speed and confidence with a brush, even when faced with this giant, formidable personality. Maybe a last burst of that Impressionist spontaneity before the doubts fully set in.
Yet, later that same year, 1882, the first major physical hurdle appears in his life.
Yeah, he contracted pneumonia quite badly. It apparently permanently damaged his respiratory system. He had to go back to Algeria, actually, to convalesce for about 6 weeks. This was really a prelude, maybe a warning shot, regarding the much more severe physical struggles that would unfortunately come to dominate the later part of his life.
But before that really took hold, there was another burst of creativity in 1883, the Guernsey Summer.
Yes, he spent the summer on the island of Guernsey in the English Channel. And he was incredibly productive, created 15 paintings in just over a month. Many of them feature the picturesque bay called Moulin.
And these Guernsey paintings are quite well known.
They are. They're so distinctive and important to the region's heritage that they were actually commemorated on a set of postage stamps by the Bailiwick of Guernsey back in 1983. It shows his enduring appeal, you know?
Definitely. But then, after that summer, the artistic pendulum really swung hard. Influenced by that trip to Italy, he shifted dramatically into what art historians often call his Ingres period in the mid-1880s.
Right. Named after the French academic painter Jean-Auguste Ingres, the master of line. This was basically a total rejection of the Impressionist blurring and fusing of forms. For several years, Renoir worked in a much more severe, almost dry style. He was attempting this rigorous return to classicism.
So what did that look like? What was the focus?
The focus shifted intensely to precise drawing, emphasizing hard, crisp outlines around the figures, discipline over spontaneity.
The result must have looked jarringly different from the soft, diffused light of something like Moulin de la Galette.
Oh, almost antithetical. You see it very clearly in works like the later versions of The Blonde Bather, and especially in the big, ambitious painting The Large Bathers,
Yeah.
which he worked on from 1884 to 1887.
How are the figures different?
The figures become quite rigid, very highly modeled, almost sculptural, and they seem encased in these hard outlines. It actively rejects the spontaneity and the atmospheric effects that had made him famous. It feels like an intellectual exercise, him trying to prove to himself, maybe, that he could draw in that academic sense, but it often sacrificed the warmth and the sheer lifelikeness that his audience loved.
And he used some significant figures as models during this period, didn't he?
He did. Suzanne Valadon, for instance, modeled for key pieces like The Large Bathers, and also Dance at Bougival. Valadon is a fascinating figure herself.
How so?
She was an aspiring artist who also modeled for Degas and Toulouse-Lautrec. She clearly absorbed techniques from all of them, including Renoir's new focus on structure and line, and she went on to become a really significant painter in her own right, a major female artist of the period.
That's incredible. And the woman who would become his wife and life partner also features prominently in his work from around this time, or slightly earlier, Aline Chergot.
Yes, Aline. She modeled for the very famous luncheon of the boating party back in 1881, just before the big Italian trip. She's the woman on the left, looking right out at us, playing with a little dog. So she was already central to his world, both domestic and artistic, even before the marriage.
Okay, so after these years spent in this self-imposed classical severity, trying to master line like Ingres, he shifts again around 1890. He finds his final, perhaps most recognizable style. How did he manage to synthesize these two extremes, the rigor of Ingres and the color and light of Impressionism?
Well, this synthesis is really the brilliance of his late career, I think. He essentially eased off the severe, hard Ingres outline. He wasn't trying to encase the figures anymore. He returned to using thinly brushed, vibrant color.
So back towards Impressionism.
Sort of, but not entirely. He retained the monumental solidity, the sense of volume and form that he had painstakingly rediscovered during his Ungris period and his study in Italy. So the figures in his late work possess the weight and presence of classicism, but they're bathed in the shimmering light and the rich, saturated color derived from his Impressionist discoveries. It's a fusion.
And the result was the main focus of his late career. Those monumental nudes and also those very warm, intimate domestic scenes. Works like Girls at the Piano from 1892 or the later versions of the Grandes Baigneuses, the Bathers. The family unit really seems to solidify and become the absolute artistic epicenter of his life in this final phase. In 1890, he married Aline Victorine Charigot, who was, about 20 years younger than him?
That's right. And by that point, they already had their first son, Pierre, who was born in 1885. Their two younger sons, Jean the future filmmaker and Claude the future ceramicist, soon followed.
And they all became subjects for his paintings.
Constantly. Aline, the children Pierre, Jean, Claude, and also Aline's cousin, Gabrielle Renard, who came to live with them and served as the children's nurse and Renoir's frequent model. They became his absolute favorite subjects. This period gave us those really beautiful, warm, unguarded scenes of daily family life. Some of his most cherished and personal works come from this time.
It sounds like a period of real domestic and artistic harmony, but tragically, it coincided almost exactly with the onset of the defining physical struggle of his later life.
It's a cruel irony. Around 1892, Renoir began developing symptoms of rheumatoid arthritis.
And this wasn't just minor aches and pains.
No, not at all. This was a progressive, degenerative, and incredibly painful condition. The sources note that by 1907, the pain and stiffness, particularly aggravated by the damp northern climate, became so bad that he decided to move. He relocated the family south to Les Colettes, a farm in Cagnes-sur-Mer, down in Provence near the Mediterranean coast, seeking the warmth.
It's truly astonishing when you consider the sheer volume and the quality of the work he produced during his final 2 decades. The arthritis led to progressive, quite severe deformities in his hands, limiting the mobility in his joints, and specifically ankylosis, which is the fusion of joints in his right shoulder. That must have severely restricted his ability to even lift his arm or maneuver a canvas.
The physical constraint was immense, almost unimaginable for a painter. Yet somehow he continued to paint, often on a large scale. And this is where we need to address that very pervasive myth in art history, the one about the brush being strapped to his hand.
Right. It's such a powerful, almost cinematic image, isn't it? The determined artist overcoming paralysis. But our sources clarify that this widely reported story isn't actually accurate.
That's right. The idea that the brush was literally physically strapped to his paralyzed fingers is erroneous. He actually retained the ability to grasp a brush, albeit perhaps weakly and with great difficulty.
So what was the reality then?
The reality was that the immense pain and the lack of mobility, especially in his shoulder and arm, meant he often couldn't lift his arms efficiently or position the brush himself. He absolutely required an assistant, often Gabrielle or one of his sons, to gently place the brush into his hand for every painting session.
And the bandages we see in those late photographs.
Those weren't for strapping the brush on. They were actually protective wrappings, used primarily to prevent skin irritation and sores caused by the constant friction of holding the brush and painting for hours with deformed joints, not to anchor the brush itself.
That distinction, knowing he could still grasp but needed help placing the brush, somehow that makes the story even more profound. It wasn't just about fighting physical limitation. It was about profound daily dependence on others just to begin the act of creation. A complete reversal for a man who had been so fiercely independent.
It speaks volumes about the sheer internal compulsion to create, doesn't it? Just had to come out. And he found remarkable ways to adapt his methods, too.
Like what?
Well, because of his limited joint mobility, not being able to move his elbow or shoulder very much, he utilized this unique creative setup, a moving canvas or picture roll. It was like a long scroll of canvas on rollers.
How did that help?
It allowed him to work on large paintings section by section. He could have a section rolled into view, paint it, and then have his assistant crank the scroll to bring the next section up or down, without him having to physically move his body or stretch his painfully limited arm across a huge surface. Very ingenious.
Absolutely. And then when the arthritis progressed to the point where holding even a brush became nearly impossible sometimes, he turned to a medium that seems even more physically demanding: sculpture.
This is perhaps his most resourceful adaptation, and maybe the most surprising. Since he obviously could no longer manipulate clay directly with his severely deformed hands, he formed a collaboration with a young, skilled sculptor named Richard Guino.
So Guino was his hands.
Essentially, yes. Renoir would direct the design, dictating the forms, the pose, the overall composition, maybe making gestures or pointing with a stick, and Guino would execute these instructions in the clay. This collaboration allowed Renoir to continue exploring the three-dimensional female form, which he had loved since his classical studies, long after his own physical body had effectively failed him in that regard.
It's just a sheer testament to his creative will absolutely triumphing over physical failure. Incredible resilience. His final major public recognition came, very fittingly, in the year of his death, 1919.
Yes. He made a visit to the Louvre Museum in Paris. And there he saw his own paintings hanging on the walls, displayed alongside those of the old masters Titian, Rubens, Raphael, the very masters who had caused his existential crisis decades earlier.
That must have been quite a moment.
The ultimate validation, surely. Confirmation that his synthesis of classicism and impressionism had indeed secured his place within that great tradition he so admired. He died shortly thereafter, back in Cagnes-sur-Mer, at the age of 78.
And his philosophy for continuing through all that agonizing pain is perfectly captured in that famous maxim his family continues to celebrate. It was the inspiration for his great-grandson, Alexandre Renoir's exhibition title, Beauty Remains.
Right. When people asked him, inevitably, why he persisted, why he kept painting through the chronic suffering, his response became the essence of his late career. The pain passes, but the beauty remains.
That quote really is the perfect lens through which to look at his massive legacy. Renoir was extraordinarily prolific, wasn't he? Creating several thousand paintings over his long career.
Thousands. His core characteristics, though, persisted, despite all those stylistic shifts we talked about. That vibrant light, the saturated color, the focus on intimate, often candid compositions. And as we established right at the start, the female nude remained his definitive primary subject right to the end, a continual homage to the joy and abundance of the body.
It's fascinating, though, to contrast that enduring focus on beauty with how his radical style was initially received. We mentioned the critics were harsh. Let's maybe revisit the brutal specifics of that 1876 review in Le Figaro you mentioned earlier.
Oh, that quote. It's hard to forget, it's so visceral. The reviewer dismissively wrote that a woman's torso in one of Renoir's paintings had, quote, a mass of decomposing flesh with those purplish-green stains that denote a state of complete putrefaction in a corpse.
Good Lord. That is violent imagery. But if we break that down, those purplish-green stains the critic saw as decay, those were actually the colors of diffuse reflection we discussed earlier, right?
Precisely. That was a reflection of the green landscape and the ambient blue light from the sky appearing in the shadows on the skin. The critic was expecting the smooth, idealized, almost porcelain flesh tones and the predictable brown shadows taught in the academies.
And Renoir gave them something different.
He was giving them living flesh, rendered in the complexity of modern outdoor light. And the conservative eye, unprepared for it, interpreted that vibrancy, that broken color, as decay. It just shows how profoundly misunderstood, how truly radical the Impressionists were initially.
Of course, his style didn't just arrive fully formed overnight. The sources point to earlier works, like Diana from 1867, as showing some of his formative influences.
Yeah, Diana's a great example from before his fully Impressionist phase. It clearly shows the influence of Gustave Courbet's realism, especially in the solid handling of the figure and the luminosity. And it features his early mistress, Lise Trejo, again. But even in this early work, you can see Renoir is already injecting his own heightened personal response to female sensuality. His figures feel different, maybe warmer, than Courbet's more objective realism.
Now, in terms of collections, if our listeners want to really absorb the full weight and range of his career today, where should they go?
Well, interestingly, the single largest collection of his work isn't in France, but in the United States. A truly staggering 181 paintings are housed at the Barnes Foundation in Philadelphia.
181. Wow. Why such a concentration in one place? Was the collector, Dr. Barnes, particularly focused on Renoir?
He was. Dr. Albert Barnes was one of the earliest and most aggressive collectors of modern European art, especially Impressionist and post-Impressionist works. He bought them at a time when many traditional museums still undervalued them. Barnes in particular saw the continuity between Renoir's late monumental nudes and the great tradition of painting, maybe linking them back to Titian and Rubens. So he made a very deliberate effort to acquire works spanning the depth and range of Renoir's entire career.
That makes sense. Now, regarding that massive output, several thousand paintings, the whole process of authenticating them must be ongoing and complex. We should probably mention the catalogue raisonné.
Right. A catalogue raisonné is essentially meant to be a complete, annotated listing of all the known authentic works by an artist. Renoir's major 5-volume catalog was published over many years by the dealership Bernheim Jean.
Why them specifically?
They were really the only surviving major dealers who had worked extensively and directly with Renoir during his lifetime. But, as you can imagine, with such a massive, valuable body of work, the existence of a catalog doesn't stop contention.
And we know this has actually become a matter of public interest, right? Through TV shows and things.
Exactly. The sources note there's ongoing disagreement sometimes over authentication standards and specific attributions, for instance, between the holders of the Bernheim Jean archive and other organizations like the Wildenstein Institute, which was famously featured on the BBC television show Fake or Fortune, several times regarding Renoir works.
Why is it so complex with Renoir?
Well, the sheer volume of his output, combined with perhaps less rigorous documentation practices during the early struggling Impressionist years, means the art market is constantly working to establish provenance and confirm authenticity, even over a century after his death. It's a minefield sometimes.
But despite those occasional contentions, the value of the unquestionably authenticated work remains immense. Astronomical, even.
Oh, staggering.
Yeah.
The monetary value is probably best exemplified by the sale of a smaller, earlier version of the iconic Belle Moulin de la Galette. It sold for $78.1 million back in 1990 at Sotheby's in New York. Still one of the highest prices ever paid for an Impressionist work at auction.
Incredible. And finally, there's an anecdote that really shows the strange life these masterpieces can lead once they leave the artist's studio and enter the world.
Ah, yes, the intriguing incident surrounding the painting Paysage Bords de Seine, landscape on the banks of the Seine. In 2012, an auction house was preparing to sell this small landscape, which had turned up, apparently, at a flea market.
A flea market find?
Seriously. That was the story. But the sale was abruptly canceled just before the auction when research revealed that the painting had actually been stolen from the Baltimore Museum of Art way back in 1951 and had been missing ever since.
No way. 60 years later.
60 years later. It just highlights how these objects, these symbols of beauty and culture, can sometimes get caught up in these decades-long hidden sagas of theft, loss, and human mystery.
It's a wild story. But the core of the man himself, Renoir, was never really about the market value or the intrigue, was it? It was always about that compulsion to capture light, life, and pleasure even, or maybe especially, when facing darkness and pain.
Renoir's life, when you look back at it, truly was this narrative of constant transformation, but also incredible resilience. He started in poverty, jumped into radical impressionism, then consciously rejected that for a period of rigorous classicism, and finally achieved this amazing synthesis as the master of the monumental, robust nude in his later years.
And the greatest drama of his life, I think, really rests in that final phase, that stark, almost unbelievable contrast between the physical reality he inhabited every day and the sheer physical joy he chose to put on the canvas.
Absolutely. For 20 years, Renoir's daily existence was defined by acute, chronic pain, by increasing dependence on others, by progressive physical deformity. Yet, the work he produced during that exact same time, those great late nudes, the scenes of domestic harmony at Les Colettes, are arguably his most joyous, most abundant, most sensual celebrations of life, light, and the physical world. He absolutely did not paint the suffering. He painted the antidote to it.
He focused on this vibrant, robust beauty even as his own body was failing him. He was literally living out the truth of his own philosophy. The pain passes, but the beauty remains.
It forces you to look again at those late, almost aggressively joyful bathers from around 1918 near the very end. You see them not just as simple depictions of the female figure, but as this powerful assertion of enduring vitality, of pleasure, of life itself. Renoir was essentially performing an act of creative defiance against his own physical agony every time he picked up that brush or directed Guino with the clay.
So, what does this all mean for you, the listener, thinking about Renoir today? We've traced his journey from those early naturalistic studies of youth and vitality, like Lys with the parasol, all the way to the final, abundant, almost overwhelming celebration of the flesh in his late bathers. Given his famous maxim, the pain passes, but the beauty remains, what does it truly signify that Renoir chose to dedicate his last 2 decades, decades defined by acute, constant physical pain, to painting the most robust, the most physically joyous, the most seemingly untroubled representations of life's physical pleasure? When things feel difficult or temporary or painful in your own world, what enduring beauty are you choosing to focus on?